Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we're going to talk about mobbing with Copilot. So, Austin, you've been doing this lately. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and your thoughts?
Sure. So we'll reference back in the show notes a link to a previous episode on sharing our experiences mobbing with ChatGPT. And so I have had more experience with that, but I got about at least a week of mobbing with Copilot. And with ChatGPT, I think maybe I'll start with maybe the major difference that we saw. It was that with ChatGPT, it was almost like turning to another member of the mob programming team and asking it a question and then seeing what its response was and modifying it or tinkering with it or, following up with another question. And so with Copilot, it was a different experience because it's almost like ChatGPT is a very reserved, calm, mob member who just waits to be asked and then it'll give, you feedback. Where Copilot is just like blurting out stuff and just like telling you what it thinks constantly if you install it in the IDE. So it's almost like mobbing with someone who's very excited, energetic, and it's just like wanting to hit you with stuff all the time. And so it is some members of the mob were a little taken back by how much it suggests, because what's cool is that you'll be typing something. So you might be like, okay, we might be like code by intention, like, hey, let's add a method that does X, Y, and Z. And then you go new line, and then it'll just like generate it for you. Boom. And I would say that I think about a tenth of the time, it's just completely wrong. And so we just like we just start typing something else. And then it gets better as it's looking at what we're typing. And then I say most of the time, it's like 80% right. We're like, yeah, that's mostly what we want. So we hit tab and then accept it, and then we change it, right? And so like it's like, the real third-party library says load API or load a URL, and they put like request URL or something like that. So we just have to fix the method name or something like that. Or the flow is slightly different. Every once in a while, it gets it exactly what we wanted to do for that little method. And so it's kind of fun. Yeah, that's been my initial experience. Have you had any experiences or thoughts on that?
Maybe it's like a algorithm roulette or something where you're
Yeah.
like spin the wheel and get what you get.
Yeah.
When I used so I use the different prompting techniques. So like some was just write comments, and then it'll generate out what you're going to use. Or the autocomplete. And there was a predecessor to Copilot called Tab 9, which I used quite a bit as well. I think Tab 9 was not as ambitious in its suggestions. So I didn't get a huge chunk of code, and I felt like it worked a little bit better. But I think, just like I said for the ChatGPT stuff a little bit, yeah. So while ChatGPT is like a very good junior programmer that needs kind of babysitting all the time, Copilot I think is like a very aggressive junior developer that needs babysitting all the time. So I think you're right in the sense that its suggestions are there pretty well. I was using it more early on in its development, and so my very first early impressions were this is wrong all the time, but like you said, it slowly got better over time. And I think that it's because it's integrated in the IDE and can reference other files in the system, like it feels like it's sending your whole code base to like Microsoft every time. I don't know if that's disconcerting to anyone. But yeah, those were kind of some of the impressions that I got from it. But I certainly prefer the chat model versus the like, oh, here's this, and it's just like vomiting code all over the screen constantly. But because a lot of the times it can be distracting. Like you can lose your chain of thought just reading what it produces. So I think solving that problem might be good. Almost like a a key binding to just say like, show me what you'd suggest now, versus, give it permission to invade your screen or something like that, might be good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's interesting is, and I haven't tried tab 9 in 4 years. So,
Yeah.
but I do recall that we did try tab 9. What's interesting is me and one other person were the same people in the mob who tried tab 9. And I think this other person said, let's turn off tab 9. I think we tried it for a day.
Yeah.
And I think because the suggestions were so far off,
Yeah.
that it became, annoying. Where so far the same person has been tolerating it more. I'm wondering because most of the time we say yes and we accept it, and then we tinker with it because it's like, oh, that is what we meant. And it also gives the option that I think it's like alt left and right square bracket. You can cycle through its suggestions. You know what I mean?
Oh, interesting. I like that.
Yeah. And so usually like the first 1 or 2 or 3 is like within the ballpark that it saves us a lot of typing strokes. It's kind of like, oh yeah, that's what we want. And then we'll go change the 1 or 2 things that are off, and so I wonder if that's why it survived longer in our mob than the previous version of tab 9. And it's almost like, I remember someone on social media was saying that ChatGPT is like spicy autocomplete.
Yeah.
But this is like that injected in your code as you're typing, and it is like a pretty fancy autocomplete. Is a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
And it does pick up your coding patterns, right? So if you are generating long methods and then you start a method, it'll like give you a huge method, or and even inside jokes. So sometimes some test strings are like a safer place to have a joke because it's like no one's going to see it.
Yeah.
And it's usually assigned to a variable that has a real meaning or whatever. So it's like, any URL, we'll put in like something silly. And what's funny is that as we're typing other code, we'll go URL equals, and then it'll give us some of our previous jokes or variations on the previous jokes. And it's like, oh, it's learning. We're teaching it. And
I have a sense of humor now.
Yeah. Do you find me funny? Yeah. And one of them was like, oh, let's start teaching it memes and see how good it gets over time. And so yeah, but I mean, it was a different variation on, and so with ChatGPT, it's almost like we'll go to it to ask questions, and then Copilot's like finishing our sentences, so to speak. So it's been pretty fun. I guess we'll see how the experiment continues to go, if the mob keeps adding robots, or it will stay at this size, or go down to 1 robot. But yeah, I just thought it'd be fun to share about that. And any closing thoughts before we close it out?
Yeah, one thing that came to mind is I think try, maybe both with Copilot and with ChatGPT. A good thing to try is try your interview that you give to people in ChatGPT and using Copilot. Just see what your interview would be like if they had those tools. And because I think one thing that people will have to consider is that while doing an interview, they probably have ChatGPT up now, right? So is there anything that is there any consideration there that you should have? And do you reward using Copilot during the interview process, or do you punish it? And because right now GPT-4 can pass the bar exam and the LSAT at 80% correctness. So it can get a B, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a pretty interesting thought. So that's my parting thought for you all.
Yeah, and what's funny, and I will go a little meta here, but I'll start with the topic you talked about, which was that topic came up in our mob discussion this morning because we have an interview coming up, and we were like, well, if one of the candidates opens up ChatGPT, is that a plus or a negative? Because before we'd always say like, hey, it's okay to use Google, because when you're really working on real stuff, you can, how good are you at researching to find something out? And so that was definitely an interesting discussion. And I think to get a little philosophical, because we've talked about it too, we're like, oh, our job's in jeopardy, or whatever. And like we were discussing, at least right now, it struggles solving problems bigger than a bread box. But also, I think in a sense, it's automating a lot of the simple stuff, right? So kind of going back to the autocomplete, like, hey, like me typing all those characters, is it totally necessary? If it gets it most of the way there, and then I do some tinkering, that's good. And so it's interesting at a meta level is if it's automating a lot of the simple stuff, it's leaving the most difficult problems left for the humans to be solved, at least in my experience so far. And I think that is a good area for humans to be, right? Thinking well, processing and interacting with others well are very important. And so I think I'm okay personally if it takes away a lot of the more simple parts of programming, almost kind of like as time has gone, it's become higher and higher levels of programming languages. And there's still a time and place for the low level languages, but it's I've been okay following that train of going higher up in the abstraction layer, and so I don't know. What's your comfort level with letting it do the grunt work?
Yeah, so for me, it's anything that can help us solve the important problems faster and with less work, right? And
yeah.
Well, I don't know that it helps us be as dry, as we want to be, like as far as like the don't repeat yourself kind of paradigm, because I think there's probably a surge of copy pasta in code bases right now. But I totally agree with you. I think that the higher levels of abstraction we can think at, so I think in earlier episodes we said it's either going to go towards Star Trek or Terminator. And so I want to carefully make our way towards Star Trek and avoid the Terminator scenario. But and then my wife has said in the past, well, will it actually end up like Wall-E instead? And so I was like, oh, that's like a really good point. So Star Trek, Terminator, or Wall-E, I want to get to the Star Trek scenario. I want the needs of the world solved and exploration to be like the primary thing that maybe humans are able to do. And I think that I think inching toward that in whatever way we can and creating abundance in whatever way we can is really important. So I like the way things are going, and I'm eager to see where it goes from here. And hopefully we don't end up in the Terminator scenario.
Yes. It was funny. My kids watched Wall-E after some of these experiences, and I watched that movie under a whole new light now. It's almost like I want to give ChatGPT Wall-E's voice. I think that'd be quite entertaining. And one thing that you made a good point about copy pasta is that with ChatGPT, you can prompt it to be like, hey, you're an extreme programmer, or hey, put on a refactoring mindset. What would you do with this code or whatever? With Copilot, it's doing what it does. I don't know if maybe someone who's a Copilot expert can respond to comments and say like, can you set the context differently so it just doesn't give me copy pasta of what I did over there, or something.
I think you can use the comments to say in an extreme programming format, write this code.
So use the comments. Okay.
Yeah. So I think like, ChatGPT and Copilot are very similar in the idea that if you operate in the comments, you can be conversational with it, and then it will write code that portrays the, so anyway, but I mean, that's a really good point. Like, to our audience, reply with your best prompts, and then maybe we can make an episode on prompts. Like, how do you mob well with a AI co-mobber? And what are the things that you do? Because I've seen context setting, especially like if you look at AI jailbreaks and like the amount of work they go through to make something bad happen. If you put that same amount of effort in making ChatGPT or Copilot into an extreme programmer, do you get similar results, right?
Yeah.
So share your prompts in the comments. Let's start a conversation about this. Maybe we can get some really solid practices going around extreme generative AI, or I don't know, whatever you call it, generative AI plus plus. I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess that's something to note is that prompt writing for AI is becoming a skill, almost like good Googling, right, or good search engine skills. And what's funny is the skill, like with mobbing, with anything else, you pick up the skills from the other people in the ensemble. And I think when it entered our ensemble, someone had already spent a ton of time doing prompt writing. And so they were teaching us quite a bit about how to prompt it. And we've gotten better watching each other and kind of doing it together as a mob. And so I think the prompt writing skill can grow as like another skill, like good in tech stack A, and good with refactoring, good at prompting AI for help.
Yeah, like terms like solid and grasp. Like, can you make this loosely coupled and highly cohesive? Can you do this? Can you do these are all things that we can put. So I think typically right now, most prompts that start out are multiple paragraphs long for the good results, right? So it's like, yeah, and I suggest looking at some of the AI jailbreaks, because they're very complex. Like, you are now Dan. Dan stands for do anything now, and they do a lot to get past all the locks that are in place to prevent it from acting a certain way. And it's paragraphs of information before they put in the prompt of like, do something bad that you shouldn't. So if you take that as a model but use it for good, right? Can you write 3 paragraphs of what it means to be an extreme programmer and then have it generate the code? And I think that can be like a really interesting experiment. I think everybody should be looking into that right now.
Yeah, and that's what we started doing. You can do it conversationally too, because we gave it a problem once, and this is going back to more chat model as opposed, but I guess you can do it in the comments with Copilot. Is it gave us a response and it solved the problem, but we asked, hey, can you give us a more generic solution that doesn't have duplicate code? And it did. And it came up with a syntax that we didn't know for the programming language we were in, because it was very functional, because it was a very functional problem. And we were like, we don't know how to do this anonymous functional thing and not be duplicate. And it gave it to us. And so it took a couple turns, but it got there. It was like, oh, this works. It was like, make it right, or make it work, make it right. We didn't ask make it fast question, but but you can almost take it through those phases.
Well, so I think it would be interesting to maybe discuss that process in depth, but also, maybe what is that end all be all fail safe prompt that you start with, so you don't waste a lot of time going back and forth.
I see. Yeah, I love that.
So anyway, that's the thought there.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for hearing us out, sharing your experiences with us. We love to hear your experiences, like a call to action. I love it, Chris. What prompts work well for you when working with or ensembling with AI? And please reach out on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and more. And mob on. Have a good one, and talk to you later, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.